Chapter 2 Asuni Adohi, the Fisher of the Forest. July 26th, 1759. The sun was already well below the tree line as Jacob prepared his belongings for his return journey to Mason City. Thanks to a long explanation by Ashton, a deep and sincere apology from Glenn, and tidbits of information regarding the presence of Io at Scylla in Penshaw, the citizens of Bradford accepted in the tired travelers and promised to get them back on their feet. While the people passed around warm food and drinks, Jacob had quietly slipped off in order to prepare for his trip. As he took up his pack, he started heading for the town gates, only to be stopped by Ashton, who gave Jacob's hand a firm grip. "You didn't think we'd just let you slip away without so much as a thank you, did you? After all, without your efforts, we wouldn't be standing here. I'm just glad to see that you're all doing well and will be on the mend. With your care, I'm sure that everyone will be as good as new in just a matter of days." "Nonsense! My efforts may have kept them alive, but it was thanks to you that they'll recover. On behalf of Penshaw, I offer you my most sincere thanks. I promise you, one way or another, we will repay you for everything that you've done for us. Glenn, come here. I believe you owe him more than anyone else. Wasn't it thanks to you that the others nearly left us to burn?" Glenn sheepishly stepped towards Jacob and stuck out his hand, taking a hold of Jacob's hand and gripped it tightly. Seeing the fear and embarrassment on his face, Jacob replied, "I understand why, Glenn. Believe me, you're not the first to try and save the people he cares about with rash decisions. But next time, try and give it some thought before resorting to using fire." Jacob gave a smile that melted away Glenn's fear, allowing him to shake his hand with confidence and happiness. The survivors all turned to face Jacob, each smiling and with warm, flushed faces thanks to the hot food and drink. "We can't thank you enough for all that you've done." Now Jacob began to feel embarrassed. It's no problem, I assure you." After more handshakes, hugs, pats on the back, and words of gratitude than he could count, Jacob gave a final wave goodbye and began heading for the town gates. Each of the survivors watched him walk away. Some already felt as though they missed him despite having only known him for 3 days, but one amongst them felt something more, and as she watched him, she bit her lip and clenched her fists. Taking notice of this, Ashton nudged her forward. "I saw how much you admired him when he helped the others back in Penshaw. He really sparked your interest, right? Well, instead of just standing there, why not go on and ask him?" Elise, seeing the others encourage her silently with smiles, then took a deep breath and called out, "Mr. Norwood, please wait!" Jacob immediately stopped and turned. "Yes?" Mr. Norwood, what you did for the town, it was... Thank you," she said, turning her face down to her feet. "You're very welcome. But it seems as though you have something else on your mind." And it wasn't quite hard to see what. "Well, I was just wondering... I was curious if you'd..." "I'd be grateful if you'd like to come with me." Elise was absolutely speechless. After all that he had shown her from his notebooks, the stories he told about the echoes, and the work that he had done, it wasn't hard to see the glow radiating from her. Besides, not so long ago, he was the exact same way as she was, a curious mind with a desire to journey. "I could always use some help with my work, and it's not often that someone volunteers. Do you think you'd be interested?" "Yes, sir. I'll do anything I can to help." "Are you sure? It's not easy work." "I want to learn about these echoes, and about being a preservist. I want to see the world and all that's in it. I want to see the world as you do." "I'm glad to hear it." "But are you going back now? Isn't it a bit late for you? Why not stay and rest for the night?" "While I would like to, I'm afraid I must get back to Mason City with all speed." "Then I'll come with you." "Very well, then. Shall we go?" "Yes." And there they began, with Jacob taking the lead as Elise followed closely behind. Even with all that had just taken place only a few hours ago, Jacob seemed to move with ease, while Elise, not having been used to such work before, was beginning to drift behind. The two had not gone more than 3 miles before Elise was nearly out of sight behind Jacob, and was growing quite tired. She had not eaten a bite since the day before, even though she worked to feed the sick that Mr. Ashton had taken in to care for, and it was beginning to wear on her. Taking notice of Elise's condition, he drastically slowed his pace. While he had grown used to walking everywhere over long distances in rough ways, Elise was not. In fact, this was more than likely her first venture out and away from her home, and without the proper clothing, it was only going to get harder for her. With the growing darkness and the coming autumn, the path was littered with fallen sticks and leaves, and already Elise had had her fair share of trips and stumbles, leading to her arms and legs looking like a patchwork of dirty bruises and cuts. Jacob came to a stop and allowed Elise to stumble into him without her having realized it. "How are you feeling?" "Fine. I'm fine," making the lie so obvious that she was practically ready to collapse, had Jacob not been there to grab her by the shoulder. "How about if we stop here for the night? We might not have gotten as far as I would have hoped, but in this light it's only going to get more difficult." "But I can still see the road all right. Can't we go a little further?" "I would normally say yes, but since we're headed out into the wilderness, and Mason City is still about 30 miles ahead of us, it just wouldn't be safe." While Elise was more than eager to jump into the new life that awaited her, it was not enough to get her to just bound off into the dark and find herself lost on the side of some forsaken mountain in the middle of nowhere. Looking up at Jacob's face, she suddenly realized that he had not once taken off his goggles. In fact, ever since she had first seen him in Penshaw, she had not seen his eyes even once. While her curiosity urged her to question them, she also felt as though it may be rude to ask, but it wasn't as if Jacob didn't already know she wanted to know. "I guess you're wondering why I'm wearing these, am I right?" Following Jacob's question, she felt more at ease about the situation. "Yes, I mean, how can you even see out here while wearing those? With those goggles on, you should have fallen just as much as me. Don't you at least have a lantern we could use?" "To tell you the truth, I've never actually needed one. For a long time now, I've been able to see in the dark with no problems. Until today, though, I've never actually had someone tag along with me either. It's been one new experience after another these past few days, but I guess for you it's like stepping into a whole new life." Elise pondered on this man. He seemed so determined and focused when they were back in Penshaw, but out here, away from everyone else, it was like he was a completely different person, as if he were inexperienced and more laid back. "Anyways, I guess it's getting late. We can stop here for the night and set out in the morning. I hope we'll be able to make it back to Mason City soon. Things tend to pile up fast when I leave." "Pile up?" "Yes, I run a small clinic in Mason City, and being the only preservist within 100 miles, I really have my work cut out for me. I have a few assistants who help me with basic things like paperwork or sorting and cataloging my records, but most of the work I do myself. It's a very hard job to maintain, especially out here with so little help." Jacob set down his case, and from one of the drawers pulled out a flint and tinder kit. "Here," he said as he handed her the kit. "See if you can get a spark going, and I'll go find us some firewood." Gathering up some dried sticks and leaves, Elise managed to get a small fire going. After a few minutes, Jacob returned with a bundle of small broken tree limbs. Slowly adding them one by one, the fire grew warm and bright. Overhead, the stars began to appear. Elise sat back against a tree and looked up at the sky. "I haven't gotten to look up at the stars in so long, I almost forgot how beautiful they are." From his case, Jacob pulled out a small pint-sized jar. Inside was an assortment of dry roasted vegetables. "Here, you must be hungry. I'm guessing you haven't eaten much since before I got to Penshaw, right?" Elise politely took out a piece. "Thank you," she replied before turning aside to quickly nibble at it, for indeed it had been almost 2 days since she had gotten the chance to eat, and even then it had not been that much, since most of the stew that Ashton had prepared had been allotted for the sick that he had taken under his care. "Ah, I almost forgot," Jacob snapped before opening yet another drawer from his case. He produced a small jar, this one having a black, inky liquid inside. He opened the jar and set it close to the fire. Shortly after, a fetid, rank smell radiated from it that was as strong and foul as that which had enveloped Penshaw. But it was not like that of the burning flesh. It was more akin to rotting leaves, mud, and smoke. Elise quickly covered her nose so as not to breathe in any of the scent, but Jacob seemed to not be troubled by it at all. "What is that stuff?" It's a brew made from boiled black walnuts. It works great as a general echo repellent, but more specifically, it keeps away the Asuni Adohi. What's an Asuni Adohi? It's better known as the fisher of the forest, and if not taken care of, it can devour entire populations of animals, other echo, sometimes even people. Elise nearly choked. There are echoes like that out here? Absolutely. There are all kinds of echoes out there, and preservists like me are still discovering new ones all the time. In fact, I had only discovered the fisher just a few years ago. Before that, no one had even heard of such a thing. So I guess it's a regional species to these mountains. Maybe even a mutation of another echo altogether. So what was it like seeing the fisher for the first time? Honestly, I was terrified down to the soles of my shoes. I'd just only come to live and work in Mason City for a few months before getting the job to handle the fisher. Before that, I was handling small jobs around town, just trying to make a living. When I first got there, no one had even heard of echoes, much like back in Penshaw. But as more and more people came to live in and around Mason City, the number of encounters with echoes increased. Some grew ill after eating echoes that look like plants, or getting bit by echoes that look like insects, so work began going more smoothly, and I was able to set up a small practice in an apartment over a store. It wasn't long after that the notices from Ives began coming in. Ives was one of the first settlements in the Takodas. It started out as a lumber mill and then expanded into a trading post between Hallfield in the north and Hartmouth in the south. From there, more and more people settled in the area, most of them taking up hunting and using Ives to sell furs and meat to the traders that came through the area. Anyways, at first the messages from Ives didn't seem all that bad, just the numbers of animals was somewhat lower than usual. I thought it was only because the last hunting season had been so good that the numbers hadn't fully recovered. But what happened next was what caught my attention. And what was that? The hunting dogs were going missing. That doesn't sound so strange. Dozens of them had disappeared in just the span of a week, and all without so much as a sound or a trace of an attacker or thief left behind. Okay, now that sounds more like an echo. Exactly what I was thinking. It was then that I decided to pay a little visit to Ives to check things out. About 2 miles outside of Ives, I ran into a young boy named Barton. "Excuse me, but I'm looking for a dog. He's short, has yellow fur, and a brown spot on his left ear. You haven't seen him, have you?" "Sorry, I can't say that I have." "Where did that dog get to? I swear he was just here." "Are you sure he came this way?" "I'm certain. We were trailing a doe along the road, and he chased off after it. He stopped barking a little while ago, so I can only think that he got lost or hurt. I've already checked everywhere where he might have turned up, but his trail's gone cold. We don't need another dog going missing. We've already lost too many as it is." Wait, missing? Tell me, you wouldn't happen to be from Ives, would you?" "Yes, that's right. My name's Jacob Norwood. I've noticed that your town has put out a lot of requests in a hunt of some sort." "Yeah, something's been snatching up the wild game around here, and not only that, our dogs as well. The first night we lost 6 dogs that we had just taken out that morning, and then the next night we lost the 18 we used to try and track down whoever took them. Have there been any clues as to what might have taken them?" "Not one. I don't know what we're going to do. If we keep losing our dogs, then the whole town's going to go under." "Maybe I can help. I'm a preservist by trade, and I investigate these types of problems. We need all the help that we can get." It took the 2 of us about an hour to get to Ives. Barton had told me about how his father, Sonny, who was essentially the mayor of the town, and was heading up the investigation. However, nothing ever turned up that might lead them to catch the culprit. At the time, they had no idea that they were dealing with an echo, but while I knew that this had to be the work of one, I had no idea just how dangerous this hunt was going to be. Now, Ives was not all that big of a town. It was just a few houses and a general store at best, and a stockade and camp at worst. The houses were all made from the same wood as the surrounding trees and were shaped like tents. The entire town was surrounded by a fence about as tall as a man, with the top carved into spikes so as to prevent unwanted people and animals from coming in. The fence was kept up by braces built on both sides, and the only ways in were a gate beside the general store and one at the rear of the town away from the road, unless of course someone or something could jump over the fence. When I came in, the town was quite busy. Some were repairing what looked to be pens where the dogs were kept, while others were combing the area for signs of a break-in. Near the center of town, a large group of people had gathered around a house. Off to one side was a pen that held 2 dogs. The dogs were quite large, coming up to about my waist, and upon seeing me they started barking furiously, which of course made everyone gathered turn to look at me. Since this was my first actual job in the field, alone, I nervously bowed and introduced myself. When the townsfolk saw that I was no threat, they immediately turned back to talking to each other, almost as if they had forgotten that I was there in the first place. Barton took me inside the house, which was actually a lot more spacious than I thought when I saw it from the outside. "Dad, we have a visitor!" From somewhere further in the house came a tall, lean, muscular man, with gray patches of hair and sunken but piercing eyes. He stood well over not only Barton's, but my head as well. The man was practically a giant. "Another one coming to volunteer to help us out?" "He said he was a preservist or something from Mason City." "Preservist? Never heard of such a thing. So what is it that you do exactly?" Sonny said as he took and shook my hand. His grip felt like a vice, and it took everything I had to keep from wincing in pain. "It's my job to investigate abnormalities in the world and to prevent and or undo any and all problems that are caused whether directly or indirectly by the organisms known as echoes. As such, my title, Preservist, meaning I preserve the balance between nature, mankind, and echoes." "Echoes? Never heard of them either. But if you're here to lend a hand, then I welcome you." Sonny led me to a sitting room, and we had a long talk about all that had happened in the past few days. Apparently he and a few others had gone on a trip somewhere deep in the forest, where the year before one of the hunters had spotted a large boar. Hoping to track it down, they followed its trail to a cave where they found an assortment of animal bones, but nothing to suspect that the boar was still nearby. But now they came to believe that they had stumbled into a wolf's den. They quickly left the cave and decided to hunt in a different area of the woods. However, what they hadn't expected was that they had already stumbled into a trap laid by the Asuni Adohi. By the end of the day, they had not found anything, and so they set up camp, planning to try a different area of the forest the next morning. Sometime in the night, the 6 dogs that they had brought along started barking and then ran off, chasing something into the woods. One of the hunters, a man by the name of Bennett, chased after them. After a few minutes, the barking stopped and the forest got quiet, but neither the dogs nor Bennett returned. By the next morning, Bennett had still not returned, and there were no signs of the dogs. The party searched around the camp, but did not find anything to tell them whether either Bennett or the dogs had gone to, at least not until they found their worst fears. In a clearing about half a mile away from the camp, they found a torn leg from one of the dogs, and just a little ways away they found Bennett, or at least what was left of him. His body was ripped apart and drained of blood. It was as if he got attacked by a bunch of wild animals. It was then that Sonny and the group suspected that wolves were the culprit and had ganged up on the dogs and gone after Bennett when he showed up. And so, without the dogs and having lost a good hunter, Sonny and the rest retreated back to Ives, intending to come back and exterminate what they thought was a den of wolves, right down to the last pup. We got together everyone who could point a gun or handle a blade and set out within the hour. There were about 30 of us and 30 dogs. We headed out into the cave we found intending to set a trap and ambush the wolves, but none ever showed up. After about 3 hours we split up into 5 groups and searched the area for any signs of the beasts. Throughout the whole day the dogs never caught the scent of anything. We met back up at sundown with nothing to show for it and decided to head back to town, but as it grew dark, something happened. We were set upon by some kind of thing. It started going after the stragglers, pulling them back into the woods, and then suddenly disappearing before we could catch sight of what got hold of. Both the dogs and the hunters we brought were being dragged off one by one. We had no way to stop it. When a dog was dragged off one way, we would give chase or fire, but then a hunter or dog would be dragged off in another direction. It was as if we were surrounded. The strange thing was, though, that there was no sound coming from whatever was after us. No breathing, no movements, not even a snapped twig. By the time that they had returned to Ives, only 12 of the 30 dogs that they had started with remained, and about 21 of the hunters were still alive. From that day forward, no hunter was allowed to leave Ives past sundown, and the town gates were sealed until dawn. But even so, this still did not stop the disappearances. Even though we sealed the gates and made sure nobody broke the rules we put into place, it seems as though this did little to stop the disappearances. On the first night, we set up a guard to keep watch over the town, but while he was there, apparently a dog caught wind of something just outside the walls and started barking, raising up a fuss from the other dogs. When we woke up the next morning, the kennel was empty and there was no trace around the town. At the place where it had been barking all night, there were scratch marks all the way up the wall. There were also a few splatters of blood and tangled fur at the top. We didn't know what to make of it. On the second night, we had a few of the hunters patrol the town. Very early in the morning, they heard a commotion come from one of the kennels and went to go check. Upon arriving, they found that one of the doors to the kennel had been broken open, apparently from the inside, and the dogs were dragged out by someone or something, and when they searched the area, there was nothing to be found. And just last night, my dogs, my own personal hunting dogs, were taken away, stolen right out of the kennel behind my house. Whoever or whatever is doing this is going to pay. I understand, sir, and I'm willing to do all that I can to help you in this matter, but from the sound of things, you're going to need a lot of help, at least more than I can offer. Let me be the judge of that. Sonny led me to his kitchen, where a wide table was set up in the middle of the room. On the table was laid out a map of what looked like the surrounding mountains. Every little detail, down to every hollow, hill, and even every tree was marked on that map. And based on how worn and torn the paper was, I can only assume it was several decades old, likely made when the first hunters came and settled in the area. Here's what we learned about this thing so far, he said, tracing his fingers. The cave that we first found is about here, about 10 miles from Ives. We set up camp the night of the first attack about a mile and a half northwest of the cave. The next day we found Bennett, or what was left of him, around here, he said, pointing to a spot about a third of the way between the cave and the campsite. The same day we gave a wide search around the cave. We found nothing when we started back towards Ives. We followed along the trail we had made the day before from the camp. About 2 miles from the camp towards Ives, at sundown, was when we were attacked. I gave the map a good look before speaking. It seems as though whatever attacked you followed you all the way from the cave, so it comes as no surprise that you were attacked at both the campsite and on the trail back to Ives. If you had gone another way, you might have avoided losing your men and dogs. Sonny gave the map a good look over. Didn't you say that when you went out hunting the first time that you hadn't found any animals around the cave? Not a trace. It was like the forest was empty. I gave the matter some thought. Maybe whatever it is that's been going after the town ate the animals that lived near the cave you found, which was probably its den. And since you found no animals around, I can only assume it depleted its food sources. So when you and your men and dogs came by, it saw you as a new source of food and followed you. So it must still be close by. As long as there's something it can eat, it's going to stay here. But we searched the forest and we found nothing. Now, that's where you might be wrong. You see, echoes, they have a way of being right in front of you without you actually realizing it. They're capable of this because they look like things we understand and see every day, like animals and plants. That way they can live without being disturbed by other animals or people. However, sometimes, when they're out of their natural habitats, their disguises no longer work. There's a good chance you might have easily missed it. Let's see. Whatever this thing is, lived in a cave before coming here. Cave is easy enough to hide in, but out in the open, it has to hide itself. When you searched the woods around the cave, did you happen to notice anything out of the ordinary? Not that I can remember. He then went into deep thought. Wait, I do remember something. Around some of the trees near the camp, there was something sticking to them. I couldn't tell what it was, but the stuff was everywhere. On the ground, the bushes, everything. It took forever to get that stuff off. How about your dogs? Did they touch the stuff? I think so. They went everywhere we did, including the campsite and the cave. Whatever it was must have left that. It could be why your dogs have been going missing. So maybe if we can find that same stuff around Ives, we can find just where this thing is hiding. And so we set up a plan for hunting down the fisher. First we started going around the town, speaking to the other hunters that managed to come back after the second attack. Some had lost their dogs during the hunt, and there were some that hadn't. When we got a look at the dogs, they too had residue stuck to them. Strangely enough, these that had the residue hadn't been taken. From this I formed a hypothesis. that whatever was taking the hunters and dogs was slowing down its feeding habits. Now, this was only a guess based on the disappearance of the local wildlife populations and how, based on Sonny's retelling of recent events, it seemed to go after the hunters and dogs as if it were starving. But now, only a dog or two were going missing each night. So I thought perhaps it had eaten so many so fast in order to regain its strength, and now that it was getting its fill, it was slowing down, making sure that its food supply would last. So we started searching around for the residue that Sonny had found in the forest, but what Sonny and the others had thought was some kind of slime or resin was actually tiny threads. The threads were especially sticky and almost impossible to see with the naked eye, yet at the same time they were especially strong and couldn't be broken by hand. So whatever got tangled up by the threads would end up being dragged off to be eaten by the fisher. Once we found the threads, we started seeing them everywhere around the town. It was as if the whole town had been covered in a net. I began going around to each kennel to inspect the threads. Nearly every dog was covered by them, and so Sonny used a knife to cut them free. But I did make one interesting observation. The dogs that had been taken during the past 3 nights all barely had come into contact with the threads, having only a handful of them leading to their kennels. However, there were other dogs, some having threads wrapped around them, and yet these dogs had not been taken. Now, based on the places in which the attacks had been reported, these dogs were by far the closest and what would have been the easiest to be taken. Yet the dogs that had been taken were farther away from the town gates, as well as the attack sites, so it didn't make sense why the obvious targets were left alone, and it was then that it came to me. I started following the threads from the kennels and found that in some places the threads had been cut, or rather, dissolved. When investigating the thread ends, I noticed that a mild acid had been used on them. Now, there were plenty of sources from where this acid could have come from. For example, the meat from the animals the hunters would bring in. Of course, if this was the case, then the animals wouldn't be getting caught so easily. There's also the milk and coffee that is brought and sold at the trading post, but since trading has gone down with the loss of local animal stocks, these options were also a dead end. Wandering around the town, though, trying to come up with a solution to my theory, I came across a furrier by the name of Renee. Now, I've said before that Eyes is well known for its furs, and it was here, at this rather small shop, that I found the answer. The air around the shop smelled foul, and the air was hot despite it being an open-air building. Miss Renee was busy boiling something in a large pot when I came up to the shop. Watching her, she pulled out a deer's hide from the pot, colored as black as coal. Now, there were no such deer in this region or any other around, and so, being curious, I came up to her and asked, "Excuse me, but how is it that you came across such a deer skin like this? I know of no such species." "What?" she replied, as if I hadn't the faintest clue about what she was doing. "This is just a normal hide. We dye them to make them sell better. Any old hunter can sell a deer hide, but we take pride in making the ones we trade ones worth wearing." "So, what kind of dye are you using?" "Walnut. It's the only kind around that gives these furs a real even coat. I just picked them from the tree behind my house, boil them for a few hours, and then set the furs in and boil them for a few more, until they're evenly coated, and I hang them up to dry. It's going to take a week or so for the smell to go away, and maybe by then Sonny and the others will be able to bring in some more stock." "So, what do you do with your brew when you're not dyeing furs?" "I have to take it and dump the pot outside the town. Can't have this stuff stinking up the place. If I just left it out, folks and animals alike wouldn't come near here, and the hunters would be out of work." "So, where do you dump it?" "I take it to a hole just a little ways out of town, then I cover it over and let the ground take it in, simple as that." And so, taking this into consideration, I followed the path from Miss Renee's shop to the town gates. Miss Renee lived along the wall, far from the other houses, but close to the kennels that held the dogs that hadn't been taken yet. Following only a few assumptions based on how uneven the path was and how full the pot of dye was, I theorized that she would bring the pot out of town. The uneven path would jostle the dye and it would spill along the path, and as she would pass, the dye fell onto the threads and dissolved them. And so I took a small sample and tested my theory, and sure enough, the dye dissolved the threads entirely. But something else seemed to take place as well. When I was at Miss Renee's shop, I noticed that my case would shake whenever I got close to the cauldron of dye, and stopped shaking when I left. I set down my pack and the sample of the dye close by. Sure enough, my pack started shaking again. I immediately began opening up my case to find the source of the shaking. As it turned out, the sample echo specimens that I had collected and carried with me were all repulsed by the dye. One by one, I would bring the sample up to each echo, and immediately they would push away to the opposite side of their containers, trying to get as far away from the dye as they could. So, for whatever reason, this dye could not only dissolve the webbing of the fisher, but it was also an effective echo repellent. I took my findings straight to Sawney, and with great joy he thanked me. Using my discovery, he went around the town freeing the dogs and destroying any and every thread we could find so as to prevent any person or animal from being caught again. Once we got rid of the threads, Sawney shook my hand and had a celebration to congratulate my work. After a few tall mugs of cider and Sawney's homemade venison stew, I headed off to bed in a cot that Sawney lent me, believing that everything would be all right for Ives. I hadn't even stopped to consider the fisher. At the time, I believed we would use the dye to ward off the fisher, but the next morning when I woke, I came downstairs and was met by Barton, who quickly handed me a rifle. "Come on, everybody's waiting," he said, leading me outside to where I found myself surrounded by at least 20 hunters. "Are you ready for this?" Sawney asked me with a smile. But I wasn't ready. Not at all for what was coming. I caught up with Sawney as they began heading for the town gates. I asked him about what he planned to do. "Simple. Plan on finding this thing, whatever it is, making sure it will never hurt anything ever again." "But, sir, my findings. With the dye, we could repel the echo that's causing all of this. With it gone away, the animals will come back. I'm sure of it." "Sorry, Mr. Norwood. Know your intentions are good, but leaving something like this wandering in the forest, especially with the lives of the townspeople as well as any travelers, such as yourself, at stake, we can't leave this to chance. Just think, if you had been caught, then you wouldn't be standing here today." "But, sir—" "But nothing. This ends here. Now, are you coming or not?" Being young and small as I was, there was no way I could stand up to him, and so, sheepishly, I tailed after them into the forest. As we went deeper, we found the remains of the dogs scattered everywhere, some half-eaten and others stripped right down to the bone. But even seeing this, we kept going forward. Sometimes the other hunters would get stuck with the threads, and they'd simply pour the dye over them to keep going. At the very least, Sawney was willing to use a portion of my plan, but it didn't make me feel any better about killing an echo that was doing little more than gathering food and eating. About a mile into the forest, we found a glade that was filled with old carcasses from wild pigs, deer, squirrels, rabbits, a wolf or two, and even a horse. "You see that, Mr. Norwood? How much trouble this thing is? It's why we gotta do this." Upon seeing this, I even began to doubt myself and whether or not using the dye was right. The dye could work, but it wouldn't be enough to keep the echo away forever. Eventually it would come back, or even go somewhere with a more vulnerable target, like children. "Spread out and search the area. With this many bodies, it's bound to be close by." It was oddly silent as we searched the glade, looking for anything out of the ordinary. There were the same threads all over the place, some of us getting coated in things more than we would care to admit. With everyone using the dye to free themselves, I began to feel as though my plan on repelling the echo would work since the glade began to smell as strongly as Renee's shop. We continued to spread out until we were quite separated from one another, and it was then that the fisher struck. I could only assume that the dye was having some effect on the echo, and it was simply lashing out in order to drive away the source of its pain. First, a hunter by the name of Finley got pulled up. Sawney saw it and caught him by his feet before he got too high, but the fisher was rather strong and pulled them both up off the ground. Sawney called out to the rest of us. Some of the other hunters tried to pull the two of them down while the others began firing up into the treetops. The branches above us rustled wildly, and high-pitched cries like a wounded animal rang out. Eventually the force let go of the threads, pulling Finley, and he and Sawney fell back down. Sawney ordered us to fall back to the tree line surrounding the glade, and they continued to fire up into the treetops, with the fisher crying in pain the whole time. The fisher's blood rained down over us until some of the hunters' faces turned red. After about a minute of continuous fire, it finally fell to the forest floor, and we got our first real look at it. It was in the shape of a spider, about 3 times bigger than a black bear. Its legs were about 10 feet long apiece. His skin was coarse like tree bark and pale like beechwood. Every inch of it was covered with long hairs. It had a wide, gaping mouth filled with sharp teeth and 8 large, bulbous black eyes above its fangs. It had 2 short limbs around its head, about the size of a full-grown man's arm, and just as thick. The fisher cried in pain as the hunters continued to shoot it, with some having run out of ammo, taking their knives and repeatedly cutting away at it. Upon seeing what we had done to it, I immediately dropped my gun. I understood that it had killed their dogs and friends, but to do something this horrible to a creature that was doing little more than they did to the animals of the forest, it just made me feel sick inside. To see such a creature being torn apart and dying right in front of me, I couldn't take it and left. I ended up going back to Ives on my own, still hearing the fisher's cries for some time afterwards, repeating over and over again, even when I should have been far enough away to be able to faintly hear their gunshots. I felt so sick inside, I vomited right outside the forest and nearly collapsed. So, what happened after all of that? Sonny and the others, they returned to Ives not long after I did. He thanked me for my time, my assistance, paid me for my help, though, to be honest, I just left his payment by the door as I walked out. I didn't say a word to them. I just left. It's been the only job I haven't accepted a payment for. Gosh, have you ever seen any fishers after that one? Once, about a year after leaving Ives, but it was small, about the eighth of the size that could only feed on small animals and echoes, so I left it alone. It was about that time that I heard of another precipice from the Quani region up north that had developed an echo repellent. It wasn't much different from the dye from Ives, but it was far more potent. I bought some off of him and planned on testing it down here in the Dakotas to see if it might have any effect. It was just my luck that the fisher decided to try me out for a meal. I pulled out the bottle of repellent. The smell made it retreat rather quickly back into the woods from where it came. Had I known about this concoction sooner, I probably would have spared the fisher near Ives. Have you ever met an echo that you couldn't handle like the fisher? Jacob laid down, facing away from Elise. I'd rather not bring up the subject anymore. Now get some sleep. We still have a long way to get to Mason City. Elise laid down. For a long time, she just stared at Jacob's back. This man, and everything that he'd seen, was it what she was looking for? Or would it be something she'd come to regret? As that thought passed through her mind, her eyes, finally feeling the weight of the night, closed, and she was asleep.